Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a fascinating top-down journey straight through the genitourinary system. We're going to look at 4 major types of tumors, dive into the clinical presentations, and even explore some incredibly extreme environments where these silent, hidden diseases suddenly reveal themselves. Let's just jump right in.
So here's the big question. How exactly do we detect and treat cancers that are hiding deep within our body's most vital plumbing? You know, our genitourinary system is absolutely crucial for our daily survival. It filters waste, manages reproduction, but it largely operates completely out of sight. Plus, there is actually a surprising amount of empty space inside the abdomen. It's like a giant cavern in there, meaning tumors can grow completely silently for a really long time.
Okay, so to tackle this, we're going to follow a clear anatomical roadmap. First, a top-down look at genitourinary tumors. Then, we hit the kidneys for renal cell carcinoma, move down to the bladder for transitional cell carcinoma, and finally wrap up with prostate cancer screening and testicular cancer survival rates.
All right, starting our top-down look at genitourinary tumors, let's begin our descent at the very top of the urinary tract, right where the body's heavy-duty filtration actually happens.
First up, the kidneys. And when we talk about kidney cancer, what we're really talking about, mostly, is renal cell carcinoma, or RCC. This specific type accounts for a staggering 90% of all renal cancers.
Now, RCC originates in the proximal renal tubular epithelium. Honestly, that's just a highly technical way of saying it starts in the tiny little tubes inside your kidneys that actively filter your blood. The average age of onset, around 55 years old, and it actually affects men twice as often as women. But here's the crazy part. Because the kidneys sit so incredibly deep in the back of the abdomen, in this massive retroperitoneal space, a tumor has plenty of room to grow without anyone noticing. A patient might not feel classic symptoms like loin pain, or notice a mass, or even lose weight for a very, very long time. In fact, half of all these tumors are found entirely by accident. You go in for a scan for a completely unrelated issue, and boom, there it is.
Once a tumor is actually caught, doctors obviously need to figure out the prognosis. And to do that, they use something called the Mayo SSIGN score. Basically, they're looking at the tumor's stage, its physical size, its grade, and whether the cells inside the mass are dying off, which is called necrosis. And the numbers here brilliantly illustrate why early detection is literally everything. If you catch it early and have a low score of 0 to 1, your 10-year survival rate is incredibly high. We're talking almost 97%. But if the disease has progressed and that score hits 10 or above, that survival rate plummets to under 20%.
Okay, moving down the urinary tract from the kidneys to the bladder, we run into a critical, absolute red flag symptom for malignancies across this entire system: painless hematuria. In plain English, that's blood in the urine, but without any associated pain.
There is a golden rule in the medical world about this. Painless, frank blood in the urine, especially if you also have an abdominal mass, is a blaring, flashing alarm bell. It's a hugely ominous sign. The clinical rule of thumb is that whether that bleeding is coming from the upper kidneys or the lower bladder, you absolutely must assume it's a malignancy until proven otherwise. It is literally the body's ultimate warning light.
So following the ureters down, we arrive at the bladder. Now here, the cellular landscape changes completely. Bladder cancers are overwhelmingly transitional cell carcinomas. We're talking over 90% of cases in both the UK and the US. But you know what? Let's look at this from a totally unexpected angle. Have you ever wondered how altitude affects a hidden tumor? What actually happens to a person with a completely asymptomatic bladder tumor when you strap them into the cockpit of a fighter jet?
Well, aviation is an incredibly extreme environment. Down here on the ground, under normal physiology, someone with early-stage bladder cancer often feels totally fine. But up in the sky, the human body gets hit with massive physical stress, huge pressure changes, and a hypoxic environment, meaning very low oxygen. So a tumor might be causing a super slow, completely unnoticeable internal bleed while you're walking around on Earth. But at altitude, that gradual blood loss creates a subtle anemia. Fewer red blood cells mean less oxygen getting to your brain and muscles. This rapidly destroys a pilot's ability to tolerate altitude, suddenly turning a slow, hidden bleed into an incapacitating mid-air emergency. Pretty wild, right?
Getting back down on the ground, a patient's survival hinges heavily on the TNM staging, specifically exactly how deep that tumor has actually grown into the bladder wall. The good news is, roughly 80% of patients present with tumors confined to the shallowest inner linings like the epithelium or lamina propria. Those stages, TA and T1, have an excellent prognosis and can often just be scraped away with a minimally invasive procedure. But if that tumor invades deeper into the thick muscle layer, stages T2 and T3, the 5-year mortality rate jumps to 50%, and treating it often means completely removing the bladder itself.
Continuing our anatomical journey past the bladder, we reached the prostate. This little gland is the site of the most common non-skin cancer diagnosed in American men. We're mostly talking about adenocarcinomas here, and they tend to grow right in the outer peripheral zones of the gland.
Now this brings us to a huge question: to screen or not to screen? See, the prevalence of clinically insignificant, really slow-growing prostate cancer in men over 50 is incredibly high. Because of this, the medical community is locked in a massive, ongoing debate about screening methods, especially the PSA or Prostate-Specific Antigen blood test. It is a true double-edged sword for doctors. Let's look at the benefits first. PSA screening undeniably catches many asymptomatic cancers early, flagging aggressive, localized tumors before they can spread to the bones or lymph nodes. That's great. But the risks? Widespread screening is super prone to something called lead time bias. That's when we find a slow, lazy, indolent tumor that honestly never would have grown fast enough to threaten the patient's life. The problem is, if we aggressively treat those harmless tumors with surgery or radiation, we risk causing the patient severe, life-altering harm, things like lifelong impotence or urinary incontinence, all for a tumor that wasn't going to hurt them anyway. So how do pathologists navigate this minefield? They use the Gleason score. By looking at the cellular structure under a microscope, they grade the tumor's aggression out of 10. A low score, say 2 to 4, points to a lazy tumor. That's a perfect candidate for watchful waiting or active surveillance. No need to rush into heavy interventions. But if that score hits an 8 to 10, that screams for immediate, aggressive therapy, because you are dealing with a highly dangerous, fast-moving threat.
Finally, we reach the end of our anatomical descent: testicular cancer. For a lot of patients, the very first and often only sign they notice is a firm, irregular swelling in the scrotum.
But what happens next is honestly one of modern medicine's absolute greatest triumphs. The 5-year survival rate for testicular cancer is well over 90% across all groups. Let that sink in. That incredibly high statistic holds true even in cases where the cancer has already metastasized and spread to other parts of the body.
How do we achieve that massive cure rate? Well, it usually starts with surgically removing the source of the cancer. Then, that's followed by a highly effective, albeit really intense, 3-drug chemotherapy cocktail. The curative regimen relies on bleomycin, etoposide, and cisplatin to just knock this cancer out completely.
However, if we tie this back to our Air Force pilots, this life-saving cure carries some heavy occupational baggage. Chemotoxicity is a major operational risk. Etoposide and cisplatin can cause severe neuropathy, that's nerve damage that can completely destroy the fine motor skills you absolutely need to fly a complex jet. And even worse, bleomycin is notorious for causing long-term lung scarring. Having diminished lung capacity in a high-G, oxygen-deprived fighter jet is an absolute liability. So the cure saves your life for sure, but it just might end your flying career.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider this. We have developed incredibly sophisticated ways to find and treat these genitourinary tumors here on Earth, and we're seeing soaring survival rates. But as we keep pushing the human body into extreme environments, from high-altitude fighter jets to, eventually, long-term spaceflight, how will we need to adapt our detection, our therapies, and our understanding of these silent internal diseases? Thank you so much for joining us on this anatomical journey, and keep asking those big questions.